Somewhere in Texas right now, you can buy an entire town. Not a house, not a plot of land, an entire town. Streets, buildings, history, sometimes even a zip code, for less than the price of a new pickup truck. And the craziest part? Nobody's lining up to buy them. Texas has over 500 ghost towns scattered across its deserts, prairies, mountains, and coastlines. Some are just a name on a map. Some have crumbling buildings slowly losing the fight against the wind. And some have a story so wild, so tragic, so completely unbelievable that you'll wonder how you never heard of them before. Because here's the thing about Texas. This is a state that was built on silver rushes and coal booms, on railroad promises and cotton dreams, on hurricanes survived and droughts that weren't. Every single one of these ghost towns burned bright and then went dark. Today, we're counting down 10 forgotten Texas towns, some that died quietly, some that were wiped off the map overnight, and a couple that are trying, against all odds, to come back. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Stories like this don't come around every day. Number 10. Glenrio, Texas. The town that existed in 2 states and ended up in neither, right on the Texas-New Mexico border, where the panhandle flattens out into something that feels less like land and more like the edge of the world, sits Glenrio. The name comes from the English word glen, meaning valley, and the Spanish word rio, meaning river. There is no valley here. There is no river. There is just wind, dust, and the bones of something that used to matter. In 1901, the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad came through this stretch of nothing and dropped a station. A few years later, wheat farmers settled on 150-acre plots. Cattle started shipping through. A little community grew. Not big, never big, but alive. And then Route 66 came through, and Glenrio found its purpose. That legendary highway, the one Steinbeck immortalized in The Grapes of Wrath, the one thousands of American families drove west on, chasing a better life. Glenrio was their stop. There was a motor inn, the Little Juarez Cafe, a Texaco station, and one of the most famous signs on the entire Mother Road. First in Texas on one side, last in Texas on the other, depending on which direction you were driving. Being split between 2 states gave Glenrio some genuinely bizarre quirks. The Texas side was in a dry county, so all the bars were on the New Mexico side, but the gas tax was higher in New Mexico, so all the fuel stations were on the Texas side. The post office was in New Mexico, but the train depot where the mail arrived was in Texas, so the postmen physically crossed state lines every single day just to pick up the mail. For decades, Glenrio worked. It was never a city. The permanent population never exceeded a few dozen people. But Route 66 kept enough traffic flowing through that motels stayed full, diners stayed busy, and life went on. Then 1973 happened. Interstate 40 was completed, running straight and fast and completely bypassing Glenrio. Why stop in a little border town when the highway got you where you were going 20 minutes faster? Businesses closed, one by one. By 1985, only 2 people were left in town. Today, 1. A single person still lives in Glenrio, Texas, a ghost town with one heartbeat keeping it technically alive. What remains is a broken windowed motel, an abandoned diner, a weathered Texaco station, and the old Route 66 roadbed still visible running right through town. Glenrio is on the National Register of Historic Places, frozen in amber, a monument to what the highway once was and what the interstate killed. But here's the twist, and we'll come back to this later. Somebody recently bought part of Glenrio. 2 people who met on a dating app decided this forgotten border town deserved another chance. That story is coming. But first, let's head deeper into Texas history. Number 9. Shafter, Texas. The silver town that glittered and then just stopped. Deep in the Trans-Pecos region of southwest Texas, further from civilization than most people are comfortable thinking about, the mountains of Presidio County hold a secret. In 1880, somebody found silver in those mountains. And just like that, Shafter was born. Miners flooded in, houses went up fast, stone construction built to last because this place had a future. Businesses opened, families arrived. A proper little town took root in the mountain desert, powered by nothing but the silver sitting under the rock. At its peak, Shafter was one of the most productive silver mining operations in all of Texas. The Presidio Mining Company ran massive operations, extracting ore, processing it on site, shipping wealth out of these mountains. People built lives here. Children were born here. It felt permanent. But silver doesn't last forever. The ore deposits thinned. Prices swung up and down. Operations scaled back. And slowly, quietly, without any single dramatic moment, Shafter emptied out. No hurricane came. No company announcement was made. People just looked around one day and decided there was nothing left to stay for. And they left. Today, the stone walls of old Shafter still stand in the desert. Thick, well-built, stubborn. The ruins of a church. The skeleton of the old company headquarters. And the mountains, completely indifferent, keeping whatever silver might remain locked away underground. Shafter is a lesson that every boomtown eventually has to reckon with. You don't build a town on a resource. You build a town on people. And when the resource leaves, it takes the people with it. Number 8. Thurber, Texas. 10,000 people, 20 nations, one morning, gone. About 75 miles west of Fort Worth, right off Interstate 20, there is a single brick smokestack, standing alone in a field. It's enormous, towering, completely out of place in the flat Texas countryside around it. That smokestack is all that's left of Thurber, a town that at its peak held 10,000 people from over 20 different nations, and a town that was methodically, deliberately, completely erased by the company that built it. It started in 1886, when brothers William and Harvey Johnson began digging coal mines in Arath County. Texas needed coal badly. Steam locomotives needed it to run. Factories needed it to operate. And Thurber sat on top of a massive coal deposit, black gold, under the Texas prairie. What the Texas Pacific Coal Company built around those mines wasn't just a mining operation. It was an entire world. Every house in Thurber was company property. Every store was company-owned. The school, company. The hospital, company. The 650-seat opera house, company. The ice factory, which was the largest in the entire Southwest, company. And to make sure workers stayed put and spent their wages back into company coffers, the entire town was surrounded by barbed wire. You wanted to shop somewhere else? Too bad. You used company scrip, not real money, but vouchers that only worked in company stores. But here's what makes Thurber unlike any other Texas town on this list. The workers who came to fill those mines came from everywhere. Italians, Polish, Mexican, Irish, British, German, French, Belgian, Swedish, Russian. At the peak, 20-plus nationalities lived side by side in Thurber, Texas, speaking different languages, cooking different food, praying in different ways, but all swinging the same pickaxes into the same ground. By 1895, Thurber had the first fully electrified streets in Texas. Not just some streets, all of them. This little coal town in the middle of nowhere was ahead of most American cities. And then, in 1903, the workers did something the company never expected. They organized, they unionized, they demanded rights, and after a brutal fight, Thurber became the first 100% union shop city in America. The Italian miners led the charge, and when the company tried to push back, those men looked the company straight in the eye and said, "Give us our rights, or we go back to Italy." The company backed down, but coal's days were numbered. In 1917, a massive oil field was discovered nearby in Ranger, Texas. Locomotives that ran on coal started switching to oil. The company, now renamed Texas Pacific Coal and Oil Company, shifted its interest entirely. By 1926, the last load of coal came out of the Thurber mines. Workers struck. The company didn't care anymore. Italians arranged their own transport back to Italy rather than cross the picket line. The company literally chartered railroad cars to send 162 Mexican workers back to Mexico, men who refused to scab. And then one morning in 1933, the Texas Pacific Company made an announcement. Thurber was closing. That was it. Utility poles came down, wire was salvaged, houses were boarded up. The company store sold its remaining inventory at cost. The town that was once the largest between Fort Worth and El Paso, a town of 10,000 people, 20 nations, opera and electricity and ice and everything, was a ghost town by 1938. Not a slow fade, a deliberate dismantling. Today, a single smokestack stands in that field, a cemetery holds the headstones of miners who never left. The W.K. Gordon Center nearby preserves the history and exhibits. And that's it. 10,000 lives compressed into one chimney and a parking lot. Number 7. Terlingua, Texas. The mercury town that Chile saved. Out near Big Bend National Park, where the Chihuahuan Desert bakes everything into a kind of permanent stillness, there is a town that should have died completely. By every rule of ghost town logic, Terlingua should be nothing but dust and silence. Instead, it hosts one of the most legendary parties in the state every November. Here's how that happened. In the 1860s and 1870s, cinnabar was discovered in the mountains near what would become Terlingua. Cinnabar is the ore you extract mercury from, and mercury, or quicksilver as they called it, was in enormous demand at the time. You needed it for gold and silver processing, for explosives, for dozens of industrial applications. Howard Perry's Chisos Mining Company moved in and took over. Workers came from across Mexico, from across the U.S., from wherever word of work had spread. At its peak, Terlingua had over 2,000 residents, saloons, a church, a school, company housing packed with miners and their families. But living in Terlingua wasn't easy. Mining mercury is dangerous. The fumes are toxic. Workers breathed in poison every single day. The company housing was overcrowded. Disease spread. The Terlingua Cemetery, which still stands today, with handmade crosses and simple stone markers, tells the story quietly. So many people died here, and so many of them died young. By the 1940s, mercury prices had crashed. The ore was running low. The Chisos Mining Company couldn't make it work anymore. Workers left. Buildings sat empty. Adobe walls began their slow return to the desert. Terlingua was a ghost town. For decades, it baked quietly under the West Texas sun, the ruins doing what ruins do, slowly disappearing. And then in 1967, someone had a completely ridiculous idea. Two writers, one from Texas, one from New York, got into a very public argument about chili. Who made the best chili, Texas or the East Coast? They decided to settle it the only way real Texans settle things, a cook-off, and they held it in the ruins of Terlingua, because where else do you hold a legendary showdown? The first Terlingua International Chili Championship was part joke, part spectacle, but it caught on. People came, and came again the next year, and the year after that. Today, tens of thousands of people descend on Terlingua every November for a chili festival that's become one of the most iconic events in Texas. That foot traffic, that annual influx of people, it gave Terlingua a second life. Artists moved in, galleries opened in restored ruins. The Starlight Theater became a bar and restaurant where people sit under the desert sky, drink cold drinks, and listen to live music. A handful of permanent residents kept things going year-round. Terlingua is the only town on this list that died and came back. Not because of a new industry, not because of technology, but because of a bowl of chili and the stubbornness of a few people who decided to stay. And honestly, that might be the most Texas story ever told. Number 6. Lobo, Texas. The wolf town that Germans bought for $20,000, and what happened next. Deep in West Texas, about 130 miles southeast of El Paso, and just 50 miles from Marfa, there's a town with one of the most perfectly fitting names in American geography. Lobo. Spanish for wolf. And like the animal, this town has spent decades circling its own death, surviving things that should have finished it, only to almost go under again. Lobo was born in the 1880s as a steam locomotive watering stop on the Southern Pacific Rail line. The only reliable water source for miles was beneath this patch of Chihuahuan desert, which made it strategically valuable in the age of steam-powered everything. A post office came, cotton farming took hold. Around 100 people built a life here. Then the railroad rerouted, cotton collapsed, and in the 1980s came the final blow. The underground aquifer that had fed the entire valley for generations was pumped completely dry. Not partially depleted, not running low, emptied, gone. In 1991, the last residents of Lobo locked their doors and drove away. A gas station, a motel, a grocery store, and a handful of crumbling houses were left behind to bake under the West Texas sun. And there they sat for a decade. Then in 2001, a group of artists from Frankfurt, Germany, were on a road trip through West Texas when they spotted a hand-painted sign, "Town for Sale." On a complete whim, they pulled over. They looked around at the crumbling buildings, the empty highway, the silence stretching for miles in every direction, and they pooled their money and bought it for $20,000. The whole thing. They called their project Desert Dust Cinema. They dug new wells, fixed windows, repaired what they could, and for the next 2 decades, they hosted art shows, short film festivals, and music events in this abandoned West Texas desert town. People came from across the country, from across the world actually, to experience something they'd never experienced before, a ghost town that was alive again. But time catches up with everyone. By 2023, the original group of German artists were all approaching 70 years old. They'd poured their hearts into Lobo, but their bodies couldn't keep up with the maintenance anymore. They listed the entire 10-acre town on the open market. Asking price, $100,000, less than a mid-range SUV, for a complete Texas town. The response was enormous. Inquiries came from all over the world. People imagined everything from kangaroo farms to escape room experiences to sustainable art communes. In October 2023, a couple from Corpus Christi, Dennis and Bonnie Berry, bought it. Their plans for Lobo haven't been publicly revealed yet, but Lobo's story proves something that every entry on this list quietly confirms. Even love can't fight West Texas forever, but love can buy you 20 more years. Number 5. Indianola, Texas. The queen of Texas ghost towns, destroyed twice, never rebuilt. On the shores of Matagorda Bay, where the Gulf of Mexico meets a stretch of Texas coastline that feels ancient and exposed, there stands a single statue, French explorer Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle. He landed here in 1685 by accident. He was trying to find the mouth of the Mississippi River and ended up in Texas instead. Behind that statue, there is nothing. Water, marsh, silence, a few fishing boats in the distance. But 140 years ago, this was the second most important port in the entire state of Texas, Indianola. It started in 1844 when German immigrants began arriving on these shores under the sponsorship of Prince Karl of Solms-Braunfels. The location was ideal. Deep water access, a natural bay, protected enough to dock large ships. Within years, Indianola became the primary entry point for European immigration into Texas. Germans, Czechs, Polish, Irish, tens of thousands of people stepped off ships at Indianola and fanned out across the state that would become their new home. By 1875, Indianola's population exceeded 5,000. It was the end point of the Southern Chihuahua Trail, the fastest overland route to San Diego on the Pacific coast. Goods flowed in and out constantly. The town had hotels, banks, churches, a courthouse, saloons, and all the infrastructure of a serious American city. But Indianola had one fatal flaw. It was in a bad place. On September 15, 1875, a massive hurricane made landfall directly on Matagorda Bay. The storm surge demolished the waterfront. Ships were sunk. Wharves were shattered. Between 150 and 300 people were killed in a single night. Nearly every structure in town was destroyed or severely damaged. And the people of Indianola, stubborn, exhausted, grieving, rebuild anyway. It took years. The town came back smaller, quieter, still alive. Because what else do? You rebuild. Then on August 19, 1886, the second hurricane hit. And this one was worse. The storm surge was higher, the winds were stronger, and as if nature wanted to make sure there was nothing left, the storm knocked over a kerosene lantern somewhere in the wreckage, and what the wind and water didn't destroy, the fire finished. When it was over, Indianola was gone. Not damaged, not reduced, gone. Some houses that managed to survive were physically floated across the bay to other towns. The ice warehouse was converted into a home and moved. Residents scattered. In late February 1887, the Southern Pacific Railroad made it official. They pulled their tracks from Indianola entirely. There was no point anymore. One headline at the time put it simply, a city in a bad place. Today at low tide on Matagorda Bay, you can sometimes see the foundations of the old Indianola courthouse poking through the water. Old-timers in the area talk about fishermen hearing church bells on stormy nights, seeing strange lights over the water. Maybe Indianola is still there, just underwater. What's certain is this: Indianola did everything right. Right location for its era, right infrastructure, right people, right ambition, and nature didn't care about any of that. Two storms, 11 years apart, and one of the most promising cities in the state of Texas simply ceased to exist. Some things can't be outworked, some fights can't be won, and sometimes the land itself decides whether a town gets to live. Number 4. Thurber. The town inside the town. What 20 nations living together actually looked like. We talked about Thurber already, the coal town that was dismantled in a morning. But there's a layer to Thurber's story that deserves its own moment. Because it says something about Texas, about America, about what happens when you put desperate people from 20 different countries into the same fenced-in square mile. At its peak, Thurber held 10,000 people. And these weren't just American-born workers. The isolation of the location, 75 miles from Fort Worth, in the middle of nowhere, meant the company had to recruit internationally. They got Italians, Poles, Mexicans, Irish, British, Germans, French, Belgians, Austrians, Swedes, Russians, black miners from Indiana who came during labor disputes. People from 24 countries speaking maybe 15 different languages, all crammed into company housing, all using company script that was only good in company stores. Different food smells drifting through company neighborhoods, different prayers on Sunday mornings, Catholic masses for the Italians, Protestant services for the British, and whatever language God heard in a dozen other denominations. Children growing up speaking English with accents from countries their parents had left forever. And the company, run by men from New York, managing from a distance, looked at this polyglot workforce and saw one thing: labor. Controllable, replaceable labor. That calculation was wrong. In 1903, those 20 nations of workers decided enough was enough. They organized. They demanded decent wages. They demanded the right to shop at independent stores instead of the company commissary. They demanded to live outside the barbed wire if they chose. The United Mine Workers Union moved in, and Thurber became the first 100% union shop city in America. The Italian miners, many of whom had already fought for rights in Europe before emigrating, led the effort. When the company pushed back, they simply said, "Fine, send us home." And when the 1920s came and coal was dying and the company tried to break the union, those same miners made good on the threat. They accepted the union's help, bought their own tickets, and went back to Italy. 162 Mexican workers refused to scab. The company chartered special rail cars and sent them back to Mexico. These weren't people who got ground up and forgotten. These were people who said no, stood their ground, and left on their own terms. Thurber didn't just die. It was the kind of place that lived so hard, so complicated, so full of actual human dignity and struggle, that maybe the only honest end was a complete erasure. Maybe some places burn bright enough that leaving a ruin behind would be an insult. Number 3. Glenrio Revisited. A love story in a ghost town. A dating app, a couple, and the strangest real estate decision in Texas. Let's go back to Glenrio, because when we left it, there was one person keeping the lights on, barely. A ghost town on the Texas-New Mexico border, 17 abandoned structures, rattlesnakes in the motel walls, graffiti on every surface. In February 2021, an Austin-based hypnotherapist named Gabby Tushak downloaded Hinge. She'd been on the app for 6 months and was about to delete it. She matched with Eric Spain, a commercial farmer from Olton, Texas, about 83 miles south of Amarillo. They fell in love over phone calls during COVID, months before they met in person. And when they finally did meet, Eric told Gabby about Glenrio, this strange, dead Route 66 town he'd always found fascinating. They drove out there together, stood in the rubble of the old Texas Longhorn Motel, looked at the broken windows, the tumbleweeds, the highway stretching empty in both directions, and instead of seeing a ruin, they saw a possibility. They bought 16 acres of Glenrio, not the whole thing, but a significant chunk. They've been working on it since. Plans are still taking shape. Renovation is ongoing. The full vision hasn't been revealed to the world yet, but here's what matters. For the first time in decades, Glenrio doesn't just have one permanent resident. It has 2 people actively trying to bring something back. And sometimes, That's exactly how the story of a ghost town changes. It doesn't always take a $1 million developer or a Hollywood production company or a Filipino church from the Philippines. Sometimes it takes two people who swiped right, drove out into the Texas Panhandle, and decided that a broken thing deserved another chance. Number 2. The towns nobody bought. What happens when even a bargain feels like a burden? Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. Not every ghost town finds a German art collective. Not every ghost town gets a chili cook-off revival. Some of them just sit, priced low enough to make you do a double take, advertised to the whole world, and nobody buys them. Texas has properties that have been listed for years. Small towns with taverns and houses and land, priced at amounts that should generate bidding wars, and they don't. Because what looks like a bargain on paper comes with fine print that the listing doesn't mention. There's no bank willing to give a conventional mortgage on a ghost town. Lenders won't classify it as real estate. They'll call it a commercial property or an agricultural property, or just shake their head and say no. So buyers have to come in with cash, all of it. And then there's the infrastructure. No running water, or water that costs a fortune to source. Septic systems that either don't exist or haven't been used in decades. Electrical systems that are antiques. Buildings that look solid from the outside and turn out to be one good storm away from collapsing. And then there's the isolation. Cell service often none, internet rarely. The nearest hospital might be an hour away. The nearest grocery store, 2 hours. So what you're buying when you buy one of these Texas ghost towns is not just land and buildings. You're buying a project that will consume years of your life, hundreds of thousands of dollars beyond the purchase price, and every ounce of patience you have. And it might still not work. The people who succeed, the German artists in Lobo, the chili enthusiasts in Terlingua, the couple in Glenrio, they all had one thing the listing can't describe. A reason that was bigger than the cost. An obsession, a vision, a love for the place that overrode every sensible calculation their brains were trying to make. Without that, a cheap ghost town is just a very expensive mistake wearing a low price tag. Number 1. Indianola, and the question every ghost town asks. Why does anyone build anything when nature can take it away overnight? We keep coming back to Indianola, and I think that's because Indianola is the most honest ghost town in Texas. Every other town on this list died because of economics. Coal lost to oil, silver ran out, the railroad moved, the highway bypassed. These are human failures. Failures of planning, of adaptability, of timing. Indianola didn't fail economically. It was destroyed. Twice, by forces that no amount of money or planning or determination could have stopped. And yet, after the first hurricane in 1875, when 300 people were dead and nearly every building was gone, the survivors rebuilt. Think about that. You bury your neighbors, you pull your children out of rubble, you look at what the storm left behind, and you say, "We're staying." That is not a logical decision. That is something else entirely. They rebuilt Indianola, made it smaller, quieter, but alive again. And for 11 years it worked. People were born there. Businesses opened. The town breathed. And then 1886, and this time the storm took everything that the first one had left, and the fire took the rest. And finally, the survivors made a different decision. They didn't rebuild. They scattered. They let Indianola go. That decision was not defeat. That was wisdom. There is a difference between stubborn hope and surrender, and the people of Indianola found the line between them. Today at low tide on Matagorda Bay, you can sometimes see the foundations of the old courthouse through the water. Fishermen say that on stormy nights, they see lights on the bay, moving in patterns that don't make sense. Old-timers in the area have been telling stories about church bells ringing when there's no church for miles. Whether you believe those stories or not, what they represent is real. Indianola isn't entirely gone. It lives in the memory of a coastline that remembers what was built on it. It lives in the descendants of the immigrants who passed through its port and spread across Texas. It lives in the foundations sleeping underwater, patient, waiting for the tide to pull back and let someone see them again. Indianola is the queen of Texas ghost towns because it asked, more starkly than any other place on this list, the question that every ghost town eventually forces us to face. Why do we build things we know won't last? And the answer, the only answer that makes any sense, is that the building was never about the permanence. It was about the living, about the choice to plant yourself somewhere and make something, even knowing the wind or the market or the railroad or the storm is coming. Indianola was a great city, not despite the fact that it's gone, but because of everything it was while it lasted. So those are 10 of Texas's forgotten towns, some built on silver that ran out, some built on coal that lost to oil, some built on rail lines that got rerouted, some built on coastlines that the Gulf decided to reclaim, and some, like Lobo and Terlingua and Glenrio, slowly, stubbornly, and probably finding their way back. Because here's what I think these ghost towns actually are. They're not failures. They're not monuments to defeat. They are proof that people tried, that someone looked at empty desert or a strip of Route 66 or a hillside full of silver ore and said, let's build something here. Sometimes it worked for a century. Sometimes it worked for 20 years. Sometimes it worked just long enough for the kids to grow up and move somewhere else. But it worked. And in Texas, of all places, a state built on the pure nerve of people who had no business being as ambitious as they were. That is not a small thing. These towns are invitations, cheap, impractical, romantic, terrifying invitations to step outside the normal economy and try to build something from scratch in a place where something was built before. Whether that's wisdom or madness probably depends entirely on which side of the closing date you're standing on. That's all 10. If this video hit home, do me a favor and subscribe right now. We cover stories like this every single week. Drop a comment telling me which town you'd buy if money was no object. I read every single one. And if you know someone who would lose their mind watching this, someone who's always dreamed of owning their own piece of Texas history, share it with them right now. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.